Imagine this. You're in a room that seems familiar, but something is off. The walls are papered with old memories. Moments of silence when you should have spoken, smiles you forced when you were falling apart, and apologies you whispered even when you were the one bleeding. There's no sound, only the echo of everything you never said. You walk to the mirror, but the reflection doesn't match. It smiles politely. It's calm, composed, agreeable. But behind its eyes is a storm it's been told never to unleash. And then it happens. The smile cracks. Not from the edges, but from the center. A fissure splits down the face like glass shattering in slow motion. Behind it is something primal. Not a demon. Not evil. Something far more honest. That is anger. Not rage. Not vengeance. Just anger, raw, unfiltered, ancient. The kind that doesn't scream but smolders. The kind that says, "This is not okay." The kind that knows exactly when the betrayal began. And suddenly you feel it, not as a fire you should suppress, but as a compass you've ignored for years. But here's the question nobody dares ask. What if your anger is not your enemy, but the part of you that actually cares the most? What if that deep, seething pulse in your chest isn't a flaw in your character, but the very signal of your awakening? We're told from the moment we can speak that anger is dangerous, that it's irrational, that it must be tamed, medicated, managed. Anger is for the immature, the violent, the broken. But is it really? Look closer. Why do you feel that burn in your chest when you're disrespected? Why do your fists clench when someone crosses a boundary you never gave them permission to cross? Why do you feel heat rise to your face when you watch injustice go unpunished? Not just in the world, but in your own life. What is that? Is it dysfunction? Or is it the last pure voice inside of you screaming, "Wake up"? They never taught you this in school. No one told you that anger isn't just emotion, it's information. A flare shot from your subconscious, signaling that a value has been violated. It's not just noise, it's a map. And while the world told you to stay calm, polite, and agreeable, anger was the one part of your soul that refused to die quietly. But that's the paradox, isn't it? The very emotion that could lead you to your boundaries, your purpose, and your power, is the same emotion you've been conditioned to distrust. So you bury it. And when you bury it, you also bury your voice, your convictions, your ability to say no. You smile through pain. You nod through betrayal. You adapt to environments that quietly poison you. And then one day you look in the mirror and realize, the calmness you wear is not peace, it's paralysis. What if, just what if, you were never meant to be nice all the time? What if anger, when understood, is the very fuel for transformation? Not destruction, not chaos, but direction. Rage untamed is dangerous. But anger unacknowledged is fatal, to your identity, to your relationships, to your soul. And now we arrive at the core question, the one that splits the false self from the authentic. What part of you is trying to speak through your anger, and why have you been silencing it? Could it be that your deepest growth has been hiding behind the very emotion you've been taught to avoid? Could it be that anger is not the signal of your downfall, but the echo of your potential demanding to be heard? The answer isn't simple. In fact, it's not an answer at all, it's a reckoning. Because to understand anger, you must stand naked in front of the very things you've avoided feeling. You must confront the shame, the silence, the stories you've repeated about being too much, too emotional, too reactive. You must peel back the layers until you meet the part of yourself that finally says, "I will not betray myself to make others comfortable." So the question isn't, why are you angry? It's, why wouldn't you be? And maybe, just maybe, that's the moment your true self begins to breathe again. But where did this betrayal of our own anger begin? What forces taught us to suppress this vital part of ourselves? Let's go deeper. There is a quiet assassination that takes place in every so-called civilized society. A child, vibrant and full of raw, unfiltered emotion, cries out when wronged, shouts when boundaries are crossed, snarls when dignity is threatened. This child knows no etiquette, only instinct. But the world begins to shape him. The parents hush. The teachers scold. The rules descend like invisible walls. Don't raise your voice. Be a good boy. Anger is ugly. Girls don't yell. You're overreacting. Control yourself. By the time this child becomes an adult, he no longer feels anger as a natural response. He feels it as guilt. He's not just taught to suppress his fury, he's taught to be ashamed of ever feeling it. This is not discipline. This is psychic mutilation. Carl Jung once wrote, What you resist, persists. When you bury an emotion as powerful as anger, you don't get peace, you get a festering unconscious. That buried rage doesn't disappear. It evolves. It metastasizes. It takes new forms: passive aggression, self-loathing, chronic anxiety, depression, apathy, and even addiction. The very thing you thought you were silencing ends up becoming your shadow, the repressed self that walks behind you, quietly dictating your decisions. And here's the tragedy: the more you try to be good, the more you fracture inside. Society doesn't teach us how to work with our anger, it teaches us how to sanitize it, to disguise it in socially acceptable forms. Smile through gritted teeth, numb it with dopamine hits, or worse, spiritually bypass it by saying, "It's all love and light," while your soul screams behind the mask. But this isn't new. The suppression of anger has deep philosophical roots. Friedrich Nietzsche saw it early. In his scathing critique of Christian morality, he pointed to ressentiment, the resentment of the weak disguised as virtue. He warned that society often turns anger into something shameful not because it's evil, but because it's powerful. Those in power benefit most when the masses are compliant. And nothing disrupts obedience more than righteous anger. Anger threatens the status quo, which is precisely why you were told to kill it. Arthur Schopenhauer, in his bleak but brilliant philosophy, described life as endless suffering caused by insatiable desire. But within his pessimism lies a brutal truth: anger often emerges not from chaos but from clarity. When you finally see that you've been lied to, about love, about happiness, about your place in the world, rage follows clarity like thunder after lightning. And that rage? It's sacred. It means your illusion is dying. But illusions don't die quietly. Let's not forget Aldous Huxley, who envisioned a future not ruled by brutality, but by sedation. In Brave New World, anger was absent. Everyone was pacified. Dopamine was king. Comfort reigned. Conflict disappeared. But so did meaning. So did humanity. And isn't that the world we inch toward now? Where outrage is dismissed as toxicity, and compliance is mistaken for maturity. The danger isn't in feeling too much anger. The danger is in feeling nothing at all. Think of Sartre's concept of bad faith, the refusal to confront one's own freedom and responsibility. Isn't that what the suppression of anger is? A kind of existential laziness? A refusal to face the truth because truth burns. Because truth demands change. Because truth ruins your ability to keep pretending. You can't remain in bad faith forever. Eventually the dissonance becomes too great. You smile in public but collapse in private. You nod to authority but feel hollow inside. You say yes when every cell in your body screams no. And then, your body speaks. Panic attacks, insomnia, chronic fatigue, emotional numbness. The soul speaks through symptoms when you won't listen with your mind. Anger is not the cause of your suffering. Repression is. But this raises a deeper, more disturbing question. Why is anger so threatening that an entire culture must be built around silencing it? Because it reveals truth. And truth destabilizes. When you're angry, you are dangerously lucid. You see who is using you. You realize which relationships are based on guilt, not love. You feel where you've been betraying yourself just to survive. You become ungovernable. Anger clarifies what fear fogs. But this makes you a liability. A man or woman fully in touch with their anger is not violent. They are sovereign. And sovereignty is the greatest threat to a system built on control. That's why this isn't just personal. It's political. It's spiritual. It's psychological warfare disguised as civility. Anger in its highest form is not chaos, it's clarity. It's the body's sacred no to everything false. So when did we forget? When did we trade our fire for comfort? When did silence become a virtue and fury a sin? Look around. You'll see it everywhere. In people who can't say no without apologizing. In men who feel nothing but numbness. In women who call themselves crazy because they dared to feel. In a world that punishes depth and rewards sedation. But all is not lost. Because underneath the numbness, beneath the shame, something stirs. A quiet revolt. A flicker of the flame that once burned wild in you. That flame is not gone, it's buried. And anger is the key to finding it again. You just need to stop judging it. The very thing you've been running from is the part of you that still remembers how to fight. But what happens when you don't? What are the consequences of denying the one emotion that was built to protect you? Let's go further. Let's uncover the unseen consequences of a life lived without its fire. It doesn't happen all at once. The loss is slow. So subtle, in fact, that you don't even notice it until something vital is gone, something irreplaceable. It starts the moment you swallow your first scream. When you look at someone who disrespects you and force a polite smile. When you tell yourself, it's not worth the fight, not because you're above it, but because you've forgotten how to fight at all. And then the rot begins. Your boundaries weaken. Your voice becomes quieter. Your spine, once built of fire and principle, begins to bend. Not because you are weak, but because you have forgotten the language of strength, righteous anger. But here's the most dangerous part of it all. You start calling this collapse peace. You tell yourself you're being mature, that you're letting go, that you're above the drama. You post quotes about forgiveness and serenity while your inner world is quietly suffocating beneath the weight of every silenced scream, every swallowed truth, every fake yes that was really a desperate no. This is what happens when anger is exiled from your emotional vocabulary. You become nice. But niceness is not goodness. It's not virtue. It's compliance dressed in civility. A truly good person sets boundaries. A good person says no, speaks up, defends the sacred, protects the innocent, including themselves. Niceness, on the other hand, is hollow. It is the polished mask of someone who's traded their birthright of power for the illusion of acceptance. And that illusion? It becomes a cage. One day you wake up and realize you have no idea who you are without your mask. You can't decide what you want because you've trained yourself not to want. You can't feel passion because the same valve that chokes your rage also smothers your joy. You are no longer living, you are merely managing existence. Let's get brutally honest. What is the cost of rejecting anger? On the neurological level, anger is not a glitch in the system. It's a message, an alert that something is wrong. The amygdala lights up in response to perceived injustice, boundary violation, or threat. But if you are conditioned to suppress that signal, your brain doesn't stop reacting. It redirects. The body remembers. According to trauma expert Dr. Gabor Maté, suppressed emotions, especially anger, are often linked to chronic illness, autoimmune disorders, digestive issues, cancer. Not because anger is dangerous, but because the denial of anger is. When you force the body to carry the weight of everything the mind refuses to face, disease becomes inevitable. It's not pseudoscience. It's psychoneuroimmunology. What's unfelt becomes physical. And the mind? It doesn't fare any better. When your anger is denied, your sense of identity begins to erode. You become vulnerable to manipulation, to ideological capture, to relationships where exploitation is disguised as love. You lose your inner compass. You become what Carl Jung would call possessed by the shadow. Jung believed that anything repressed doesn't vanish, it grows in darkness. Anger, denied and buried, becomes rage, bitterness, self-hate. And because the ego can't handle the truth, that you are complicit in your own oppression, it projects that rage outward, onto others, onto institutions, onto scapegoats. That's why entire societies crumble when anger is denied on a mass scale. Look around. Mass shootings, polarized politics, fragile egos shattering over disagreement, passive-aggressive work cultures, burnout epidemics, the rise of online outrage culture. These are not random cultural glitches. These are symptoms of a deeper sickness, a collective failure to honor, process, and integrate our anger. We've created a world where people are either too scared to express their anger, or addicted to it in its most destructive form. The middle path, the sacred path of conscious rage, is missing. And without it, the soul starts to collapse. It shows in small ways. You tolerate mediocrity. You betray your deepest values just to avoid confrontation. You smile in rooms where your spirit is dying. You settle for relationships where your needs are negotiable. You stay silent when something cruel, unjust, or stupid is said, and you call it grace. But there's a deeper, darker cost still. You begin to resent yourself. Not consciously. No. Consciously you're proud of your self-control. But unconsciously, you know you betrayed yourself each time you let someone walk over you and said nothing. You know that the thing you call empathy is sometimes just fear in disguise. You know that your life is not built on authenticity, it's built on appeasement. And that knowledge becomes poison. It festers in the corners of your psyche, growing into self-sabotage, addiction, and numbing behaviors. You scroll endlessly. You overeat. You undersleep. You cling to distractions all while telling yourself, I'm just tired. No, you're not tired. You're disconnected from your rage. And that disconnection has left you unanchored, vulnerable to anyone who promises to give your life shape. So you hand over your power to partners, to jobs, to influencers, to ideologies. You think you're following wisdom, but you're just desperate for structure. Because without anger, you have no sword. Without anger, you have no voice. Without anger, you have no fire to burn away the false and protect what is true. Anger, when conscious, is the immune system of the soul. It detects the threat. It mobilizes your will. It says, enough. But if you've never felt that moment, never had your body shake with the force of truth that refuses to be silenced, then you haven't met your full self. Not yet. And until you do, you will keep mistaking silence for strength, shame for humility, and numbness for peace. So what can be done? Is it too late to recover what was buried? Is there a way to rebel, not against society but against the false self you were taught to become? The answer, as always, begins in fire. Let's burn away the masks. Let's unlearn the lie. Let's enter the rebellion. It starts as a whisper, a quiet refusal, a moment where something inside you finally says, no, not this time. Not because you want to hurt, not because you crave conflict, but because your soul can no longer survive in submission. Because the peace you've been chasing has become a prison. And because you've started to remember, faintly, fiercely, what it feels like to be alive. This is the beginning of the rebellion. But it's not a rebellion against the world. It's not about shouting down your enemies or burning bridges in righteous fury. No, this rebellion is inward. It is against the conditioning that taught you to flinch from your own fire. It is against the voice in your head that calls your anger dangerous, selfish, sinful. It is against the idea that being good means being harmless. Understand this, you were not born to be harmless. You were born to be whole. And wholeness requires fire. Anger is not a mistake in your emotional architecture. It is a survival tool, a signal flare, a sword, a seed of transformation. But first you must reclaim it, fully, fiercely, consciously. So how do you do it? How do you unlearn decades of silence and start speaking in the language of your own truth? Stop moralizing your emotions. Emotions are not ethical. They're biological. They don't need your approval to exist. Anger is not bad. It's not good. It just is. And it has a purpose, to alert you to violation, to energize your defense, and to demand justice. When you suppress it out of guilt, you become emotionally constipated. When you moralize your rage, you abandon yourself. You don't need permission to feel. Trace the origin. Ask yourself, whose voice taught me to be ashamed of my anger? Was it a parent who punished your protest? A teacher who rewarded silence? A culture that idolized emotional neutrality? Anger was likely one of the first emotions you learned to betray. But if you can trace the root, you can start pulling it out. Jung would call this shadow integration, the process of facing and reintegrating the rejected parts of the self. Not to destroy them, but to make you whole. Until you make the unconscious conscious, Jung warned, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. The rebellion begins when you stop calling your conditioning destiny. Redefine your anger. Anger is often caricatured as explosive, chaotic, violent. But that is reactive anger, unconscious, wounded, often masking deeper fear or pain. True anger, conscious anger, is different. It is clean, clear, directed. It says, this is not okay. It says, that is my boundary. It says, I am not willing to abandon myself for your comfort. This anger doesn't destroy, it protects. It doesn't seek revenge, it restores order. It doesn't lash out blindly, it cuts precisely like a scalpel. And when wielded well, it becomes one of the most sacred forces in the human psyche. Reclaim your no. The most revolutionary word in a culture of compliance is a full-throated, unapologetic no. No, I will not tolerate disrespect. No, I will not perform peace at the cost of my truth. No, I will not smile through mistreatment to keep the peace. Every time you say no when you mean it, you gather fragments of yourself that were lost to silence. You recover ground that was seated in fear. You rebuild your identity with the bricks of boundary and blood. Create anger rituals. Anger doesn't always need to be spoken to be honored. Sometimes it needs movement, embodiment, Ritual. Scream into a pillow. Pound your fists into the earth. Go on a run with war drums in your ears. Write letters you'll never send. Rip paper. Shout into the void. Let your body speak the language your mouth was never allowed to. The goal is not to get rid of the anger. It is to process it, to metabolize it, to let it move through you instead of nesting in your bones and turning to rot. Study the rebels. History is rich with examples of people who turned their anger into art, revolution, transformation. James Baldwin, who wrote with volcanic fire about race, justice, and truth, but always with clarity and grace. Harriet Tubman, whose rage at slavery became her compass for liberation. Frida Kahlo, who painted her pain, her fury, her defiance into canvases that still scream across time. Maya Angelou, Malcolm X, Jean-Paul Sartre, Viktor Frankl, Toni Morrison, Simone de Beauvoir. These were not nice people by the standards of their time, but they were necessary, because they turned their pain into power, their rage into reason, their anger into action. You can do the same, but only if you stop apologizing for the fire in your blood. Protect your fire. Once you reclaim your anger, people will notice, and they won't all clap for your transformation. Some will call you difficult, too much, intense. That's fine. Let them. You're not here to be digestible. You're here to be true. The fire you now carry must be protected. It will attract moths and monsters. People who want to dim you so they don't have to face themselves. Don't let them. Guard your fire like a sacred flame. Tend it with care. Feed it with truth. Let it light your path. Because in a world that rewards silence, your righteous anger is revolutionary. It means you're still alive. It means the soul has not given up. It means that beneath the apathy and numbness, your spirit still remembers how to fight. And that fight, make no mistake, is sacred. Because it's not about destruction. It's about restoration. You are not burning it all down just to watch the world suffer. You are burning away the illusion so that something truer can rise. Something that was there all along, waiting beneath the ashes. And now, with the flames dancing higher, one truth remains. The fire was never your enemy. It was your birthright. But there's still one truth left. One deeper, darker, holier realization that will change everything you think you know. Not just about anger, but about yourself. Are you ready for that final flame? Then step into it. The truth is waiting. What if the anger you feared all your life was never really about rage? What if it was grief in disguise? Imagine standing in front of a mirror, not the kind that shows your face but one that reflects your soul. You look into it and see the child you once were, small and still, wide-eyed and trembling. You watch as this child cries out, not because he is angry, but because he is wounded. Because no one protected him. Because no one taught him how to speak. Because every time he tried to assert himself, someone told him he was wrong. And so, that child buried the fire, deeper than memory, until it rotted inside, turning into shame, into bitterness, into a nameless ache that never went away. But it was never just anger. It was the mourning of a self you were never allowed to become. That's the ultimate truth. Anger is grief. Grief over your own abandonment. Grief over your own betrayal. It is the roar of the soul saying, I deserved better. That realization cuts deeper than any rage. Because now you're not just confronting injustice, you're confronting heartbreak. You're standing at the grave of the person you could have been, and you're realizing that the system, your parents, your culture, your own fear, they buried that version of you alive. And that is why the fire burns so hot. Because it's not about revenge. It's about resurrection. Let that sink in. All the times you lost control, all the times your anger consumed you, all the nights you stayed awake, seething at the world, it wasn't about hating others. It was about longing to be seen, to be known, to finally be given permission to exist without compromise. And now you see it clearly, anger is not the enemy. Silence is. Silence is the death of the soul. It's what happens when you stop telling the truth not just to others, but to yourself. Anger is truth. It's the truth spoken in the language of heat, of urgency, of sacred defiance. But truth hurts when you've lived a lie. Here's where the final transformation begins. You stop asking, how do I stop being angry? And you start asking, what is this anger trying to teach me? Not tame it, not banish it, but listen. And when you do, you'll begin to hear what's been buried underneath all along. You'll hear the heartbreak. You'll hear the longing. You'll hear the part of you that still believes in justice, in love, in meaning. You'll hear the soul crying out, "I will not die quietly." That's the secret no one tells you about anger. It's not a weakness. It's not a flaw. It's not the opposite of spirituality or growth or wisdom. It's proof that the soul still wants to live. That the soul still remembers its boundaries, its worth, its fire. And more than anything else, that it remembers what it's capable of. Because in your deepest rage lives your highest potential. That fire, when aimed with clarity and integrity, becomes vision, purpose, transformation. You become the alchemist, turning the lead of rage into the gold of change. But you must be willing to grieve, to feel the full weight of what you lost, to admit that the anger was never the problem, it was the signal. A sacred flare from the subconscious saying, it's time to reclaim yourself. So what now? What happens after the fire? You rebuild. Not as who you were told to be, but as who you've always been. Unapologetically, unforgivingly, unstoppably. You become someone who no longer fears their shadow, because you've danced in its flames and survived. You become someone who no longer chases love by shrinking, because you've seen how smallness kills the spirit. You become someone who no longer trades truth for comfort, because you now know the price of silence. You become whole. Not perfect, but whole. You still feel anger, but now you use it like a compass. You still feel rage, but now you channel it with discipline. You still burn, but now it's a creative fire, not a destructive one. You become the storm and the shelter. And here's the final paradox, one that very few ever understand. When you truly integrate your anger, you become more peaceful than ever before. Because peace isn't the absence of anger. It's the presence of integrity. And once your fire serves your truth instead of fighting it, there's nothing left to run from. You can finally rest. Not in numbness. Not in denial. But in a deeper, fiercer kind of calm. The calm that comes when nothing owns you anymore. Not fear. Not shame. Not the opinions of others. Not the lie that you're too much or not enough. Just truth. Just self. Just you. Fully felt. Fully faced. Fully free. So the next time you feel anger rising, don't run. Bow to it. Say, welcome back. What do you have for me? And listen. Because sometimes the voice you mistake for rage is the voice of your own resurrection. Let the fire guide you. Let it cleanse you. Let it teach you what no false peace ever could. Because the hidden power of anger is not destruction. It is rebirth.